Hello and welcome to the Overland Journal podcast. I'm your host, Scott Brady, and I am here with an Australian legend, Ron Moon. And Ron has an incredible history. Not only did he have a full career in the Australian Army, but then he retired and he started writing guidebooks and he started working for the Australian four-wheel drive magazine industry. He's been an editor of several magazines in Australia. He's also produced countless books and guidebooks, had his own publishing company, works closely with HEMA Maps. And not only that, but his travel exploits are also very notable. So Ron and his wife Viv have traveled around the world. They've circumnavigated the planet. They've been to multiple continents in their vehicles. And we're going to talk about Ron's experience, his decades of traveling around the world, the things that he's learned. And Ron, thank you so much for being on the podcast today.
Yeah, well, thanks. It's great to be here, mate.
Really good. Oh, it's such a pleasure. And you've written for Overland Journal for well over a decade as well, on and off, which we're so grateful for. So for those that are listening, you can find some of Ron's adventure stories in the magazine as well. But I'd love to start by asking you a few questions of kind of how the beginning of your life started. Where did you grow up in Australia, and what first inspired you about the outback?
Okay, well, I was born in the outback. I was born in Tennant Creek in the Northern Territory.
Okay.
And we moved down to Quorn in the Flinders Ranges fairly early on, and that's where I grew up as a young kid. You know, going out rabbit trapping and then with a single shot 22 and all that sort of stuff with my brothers. And then, that's where the love of that desert country comes in. And I think that still pervades my soul,
I would say that, because I've not been to the Kimberley yet, but the Flinders is one of my most favorite parts of Australia. There's just something about that range where it's not been weathered quite as much as the rest of the continent, where it's endured, the hardness of those rocks and just some of those canyons are absolutely stunning.
Yeah.
So what a neat place to grow up.
Yeah, it was. And, you won't get any argument with me about those comments. And you probably won't get an unbiased point of view from me either about the Flinders Ranges. But
it's amazing how those places can just kind of stick with you.
Yeah,
for sure.
And, in a couple of weeks' time, I'll be back in Oz in a week's time. And first place we'll be camping is in the Flinders Ranges as we head to do a trip through the desert country.
And as I remember, there is an outpost there. Is that the Parachilna Hotel? Is that the right one?
Parachilna Hotel, feral food.
Yeah. So I went through there with my dad years ago, and I had been there before, and I remembered that you could get crocodile and eat an emu and everything. Yep. So it was just, I remember taking my dad out to dinner there, and the plate comes out and it's got a bunch of little flags stuck in the meat. This is crocodile and this is camel and this is emu and this is kangaroo and everything. So
and the people who own that property own a number of the sheep stations around the place, or ranches as you call it. And but they've made a real success out of that Parachilna Hotel.
They have, and it's a great little spot to stay. And you've been on the dusty track for days or weeks, sometimes at a time. It's a neat spot to stay. But I can see why you enjoyed the Flinders so much, because it really is amazing.
Yeah,
and then what would you say were some of the things as a kid that really inspired you to not only want to travel by vehicle, but to travel at all?
Yeah, well, I think my dad was a bit of a traveller. He had a bit of a dark side, which we only found out a few years ago. In fact, in 2000 and 2001. And we found we had two brothers in America.
Ah, okay.
So a lot of the truth came out then. My dad died many years ago, but he was a traveller.
Sure.
And just wanted, and he'd settle down for a couple of years, and then he'd pick mum up and off we'd go, somewhere else. And so I got that love of travelling, and I can always remember going out with him on the Wallachra Plains more than anything, just on the east side of the Flinders Ranges, and travelling with him through there and shooting bunny rabbits and stuff like that. And they were the things that stuck with me. I joined the army when I was 15 or nearly 16.
That's very young. Is that something that they allow? Is it like a part of your education at that point, or how does that work?
Yeah, it was in those days as an army apprentice, and
Okay.
I went in there as an army apprentice and became an electrician, working on gun control systems and stuff like that later on in my army career. But I started driving Land Rovers in about 67, and got posted to Woomera, the guided weapons area, and there's a lot of Americans up there at the time just finishing off launching some of their missile systems. And of course we ran around in Land Rovers all the time and took every opportunity to go out and find some crashed aircraft or whatever it was. And,
yeah, for sure.
and you end up doing cross country, and that's where I really fell in love with four-wheel driving and doing cross country on a compass bearing and all that sort of stuff, no tracks.
And Australia is just prime for that. It's so incredible.
Yeah.
I'm not going to get too far from that last comment that you made about having two brothers in America, because I'm fascinated. Have you met them? Have you spent time with them?
Yeah, well, in fact, both of them were fairly high-profile people, and one was in charge of the American Literary Board for schools in America for a long time.
Okay.
And the other became vice president of Northwest American Airlines, and then quit very early, and followed his real love of looking for American MIAs, World War II MIAs around the world.
Wow.
And his group was called MIA Hunters, and it was declared by the American government as the most successful MIA group in the world.
Wow.
I joined him on a couple of expeditions. He had a really big one in New Guinea, or he had a number in New Guinea, but I joined him for the last one, as it turned out. And that was a month-long expedition looking for aircraft with MIAs in it.
Were you able to find any of the aircraft?
Well, he had a number of scouts working for him, local scouts, and they would get the rough idea of where the aircraft was. We would go in and take photographs and GPS it and all that sort of stuff. And we would find a serial number on that aircraft, whether it was a machine gun or an engine.
Anything that helps tie it back.
And then my brother had the contacts in the MIA unit in Hawaii.
Wow.
And he would ring them up and go, well, we've got this aircraft. This is a serial number off a machine gun. What is it? And they would come back within 24 hours and say, yes, we know about that aircraft. They were all rescued or whatever.
Sure.
And then the ones they didn't know about, we would do a little bit more of a search, see if we could get dog tags or anything like that, and we would record the site fairly thoroughly, and then hand all that information over to MIA unit in Hawaii.
Wow!
By that stage, they would have names and if 7 people were missing or whatever. There were some incredible stories that came out of it, and because of my background, my brother we hired a couple of Land Cruisers up there. And I was designated the official driver, so I got away with the easy thing. But the funny thing about that was the recovery gear. There's no recovery gear in any of these vehicles, but everywhere you went, you would come across a whole pile of locals. In fact, we were giving them lifts all the time. We'd have 20 people on board the back of the ute. We'd take them out to the main road or what. And if we got bogged, they'd just get out and all lift it up and or push or whatever.
Perfect.
It was a fabulous experience.
What was the most meaningful outcome from that experience with your brother?
That we got told we went into one village, and the guides who'd been working for my brother for 2 years said, the chief will not let anybody into this site. So he said he wants to see the boss man. It was my brother, Brian. So Brian went in to see him, and of course a couple of us tagged along with him, and we met the old chief. And he said, when I was a boy, about 7, there was a dogfight going on above our village, and the American aircraft got shot down. And he said, when I was 16, I wrote a letter to the people who concerned, about you've lost your son,
Yeah.
But don't worry, we're looking after him.
Mm.
But he said, I didn't know who to send it to.
Yeah.
And he pulled it out and said, I'll give it to you.
Oh, wow. You'd kept it that whole time.
Yeah. Kept it all that time.
That's incredible.
And So then he got his grandson to lead us into that wrecked aircraft.
Wow.
And, still had the American signature on the plane and all this sort of stuff. And so so that was one of a number of exploits and finds that we found in there. It was just fabulous.
And what an incredible thing to do with your brother.
Yeah, oh yeah.
I mean, that you didn't even know you had. I mean, that's a fascinating story. That is just so cool.
Yeah,
Oh, neat.
It was just unbelievable, and it was so good that it worked out so well.
Yeah.
Sometimes
you never know. Yeah, you never know. Absolutely. Well,
Yeah.
I mean, geez, that's incredible.
Yeah.
And then, so you were at 15, you joined the Army.
Yeah.
And did they ship you off? I mean, were you gone?
Well, I joined the Army and became an electronics technician, and then I got seconded to the British Army. And then this was during the height of the Vietnam War.
Yeah.
And nearly every one of my classmates went to Vietnam, and I was one of 140 that never did.
Sure.
Because I was seconded to this secret British unit doing weapons testing up in Woomera.
Right.
And like I said, that was when the British Army had this thing called adventure training, which you didn't have to carry a gun or a backpack with you, but you just borrow a vehicle and go out camping and things like this. They just wanted you to be in the bush.
Right.
And
gain skills.
Learning those bush skills. And I thought, what a fantastic idea.
Sign me up. Yeah, for sure.
So I became a bit of an expert in that over the next, all the rest of my career, in fact. And, I was pretty, we've done a lot of that sort of stuff. And one of the best things was about 1976, we led an expedition out into a remote country in South Australia with a group of paleontologists and biologists from the Australian National Museum. And during that trip, we were doing cross-country to remote salt lakes, looking for dinosaur bones and all this sort of stuff. And I just loved it.
No question.
Yeah, that was life.
Yeah, and it's interesting the times that I've been to Australia as a veteran myself, interacting with the Australian vets. I was in Melbourne for Anzac Day, and I walked down the street from the hotel to a small memorial, and that happened to be a World War II memorial. But the number of veterans that were there, and they approached me and they asked if I was a veteran, and I said, "Oh, I am." I said, "But I'm from America," and it really touched them that I was there. And then to go to the memorial in Melbourne, the big one, and to see. I mean, I was walking because it's very there's not a lot to it. The walls are filled with names on the inside, and you're walking around, and you get to the B's. Yeah. And then you start to go down the list and you see all the Bradys. Yeah. There was a lot of them. Yeah. And there was a lot of your young men that died in those conflicts. Yeah, for sure. The Commonwealth nations really did take quite the impact at that time. So
interesting you brought that up because I was over here for your big day of Memorial Day.
Sure.
With my brother, and my brother was doing some talks and lectures on what he does. And he said, "Oh, I got my brother up in the audience, and him and his two brothers in Australia had 67 years of service between them." Well, we got a standing ovation.
I bet
it was incredible. Yeah, people were coming up and congratulating us and all that.
Amazing. Well, we appreciate your many years of service, and it sounds like in some of the same ways that the military inspired me to vehicle-based travel, it did the same thing for you. Yeah, it did. So you did a 20-year career in the Army. Were you ever sent overseas, or? No,
I was sent to Singapore with the British, this British unit, and doing testing over there and all that sort of stuff. But when I came back from that unit, I was seen as a guided weapons expert, and they weren't required in Vietnam.
Gotcha.
So I never got to Vietnam.
Yeah.
But
it was meant to be.
No, it wasn't meant to be. Yeah. And you go where the Army sends you.
That's right.
Yeah. So, but I mean, we got out of the Army after 20 years, and I said, I don't want to do electronics anymore.
Sure.
And I said, okay, well, what are we going to do? And by that stage, we'd founded a magazine called Action Outdoor Australia, which was into the backpacking sports. canoeing. Wilderness stuff is what I love, wilderness canoeing and rafting. And I was never a good rock climber.
Neither am I.
and then we'd gone to Cape York in the early 80s, and in 84 we thought, because we got up there, and I like motivating people to go and see the country and this sort of thing. And we got up to Cape York, and we'd been up there for 3 or 4 weeks, and people had gone across the Jardine. Back in those days, there was no ferry. You had to drive across this very impressive river. And they come back and go, oh, there's nothing to see. And I'm going, well, hold on a minute. We've just spent 3 or 4 weeks up there. Never got bored or anything. So that was the motivation to write our first guidebook on Cape York. So that was in 1984.
And doesn't that river still have crocs in it?
Oh, yeah.
I mean, you hear every once in a while of like a German tourist that goes missing. It's always, why is it always the Germans? I think maybe they taste a little better to the crocs. I don't know.
And also the locals, because familiarity breeds contempt. I think.
Yeah, for sure.
They swim across the river to get to the ferry or something like that. And old man crocodile. I remember when we done one trip, we were with a group of friends who were right into wilderness canoeing, and we'd backpack in with inflatable canoes in our backpack, and then walk down the river until we could start paddling. Sure. And this is what we'd done on the Jardine. The first thing, was the first descents of any route, from the source to the sea, and we took 5 days. And my brother was doing vehicle backup for me, and he was talking to the Aboriginal ferrymen, and the ferryman goes, "Has your brother got a gun?" And Dave says, "No, it's a national park. You're not allowed to carry a gun." And the bloke goes, "Old man crocodile, he don't know that."
That's so true. The croc's like, "I like this place. They don't have guns."
That's it. But so they were great trips. First descents of rivers and things like that. So they were back in the 90s, and they were big. We had run-ins with big crocs every trip. And most people never came back. We'd go with 4 or 5 other people, blokes. And only me and my mate ever went back once. Everybody else went, no, forget it, those crocs are too big. And now, 20, 30 years further on, the crocs have got bigger.
Yeah, sure.
And even less afraid of humans. So
for sure. They've had more meals.
I wouldn't be paddling those rivers, especially in an inflatable canoe.
Oh, that's so true. So, I mean, Cape York is a spot that fascinates a lot of people to travel. Things like the canning stock. I mean, these are all fantastic routes that are kind of spoken of in hushed tones because they're so meaningful to the overlander. Yeah. And I haven't made it all the way to the end of Cape York. Matt Scott, my co-host, has several times. But how have you seen that changed from the 80s when you first did the trip to now? What are you seeing that's different?
The big thing is back when we first went up there, and I certainly wasn't the first four-wheel driver to go up there. There was quite a few still going before me, but there's a hell of a lot more people up there now travelling. But the big thing was that in those days, the big thing was to get to the top, and that was the whole expedition, to get to the top. And that took you a couple of weeks from out of Cairns, and a lot of hard work and river crossings and things like that. And of course the Jardine, it's a fairly fast flowing river. It's 145 metres, about 170 yards from bank to bank, sand and crocs. Back in those days, if a croc showed up, well, he wasn't there for very long. Somebody would get rid of him. But nowadays, the Cape has opened up. Aboriginal communities have opened up their lands in a lot of places, so you can go out to other places. So the object isn't really to get to the top, although that's what everybody goes to, the northernmost tip. But there's so many other things you can do. Right. So that's what people do. They go up there and go off that major route to the top and go fishing at Weipa or Portland Roads or whatever it may be.
It was such a beautiful area. I made it maybe 3 or 4 hours north of Cairns, so along the coast. Yeah. And it was just,
or something like that.
That's what it was. Yeah. And it was gorgeous.
Yeah, beautiful.
Yeah. I mean, I was so impressed by the tropical birds, and the flora had changed so much from what you experience even in Brisbane.
No, it's a fascinating area, and even after all this time, it's probably the most popular four-wheel drive destination in Australia. Thousands get up there every year. And, you don't really want to be there in the school holidays in August, September.
Sure.
But I was up there last year with my son. He was running a tour up there, and he'll be up there again in another few weeks. I don't think I'll be able to make it though this year, but it is still a fantastic trip. How many trips have me and Viv done there? Somewhere in excess of 40.
Oh, geez, that's unbelievable.
We haven't got to the top every time.
Sure.
Probably 15 trips, something like that, to the top.
Sure.
But you get up there and you get lost in some area, either north of Cape Trib or over on the western side around the Gulf country or whatever tickles your fancy. You go looking for old gold mines or crashed aircraft or whatever.
And you've traveled across Australia many times. What is your favorite place in Australia if you were to have to pick?
Well, I guess if you look at the number of times I've been there, it's probably Cape York.
Yeah.
But I think, we started travelling across the Bight, as in not the Nullarbor Plain, the highway, but the Bight around the coastline. We started travelling that in about 2008. And we'd done little bits of it back in my early days when we were spearfishing and things like that. But we never set out to drive around the coast. And I've got to say that's probably the best coastal expedition drive, four-wheel drive trip you can do in Australia. You go from Ceduna in South Australia to Esperance in Western Australia.
Right.
It's about 1,450, well, it's nearly 1,000 mile. There's only one fuel place you can really get, and that's right on the border at Eucla. And we can do that now with only about 30 mile of bitumen or blacktop.
Sure.
All the rest is either on the cliff tops or on the beaches or in amongst the sand dunes.
Well, and I have you to thank for the trip that I did across there, because you had done that trip with Brad McCarthy, I think. Yep. And so he knew the way. So when in 2018, when I drove the Bight, it was along the track that you guys had kind of pioneered.
Yeah.
And it was incredible how remote that was. I mean, there's one remote kind of fauna station where they do a lot of like bird studies and things like that. That was bird observatory. It was fascinating.
Yeah.
And then we also took that little detour north. So north of the highway, there was this abandoned gas station and town. Those old cars and stuff, unbelievable.
Yep. I know exactly where you are. And,
that was fascinating.
Hundreds of cars that broke down when the old Nullarbor was just a track.
Sure.
And been left there.
It was and the old station and the old homes and stuff like that. It was just, that whole area felt very remote.
Yeah.
I mean, the Canning Stock, no question, feels extremely remote. Because we didn't encounter another vehicle the whole time. When we got close to the top, we were some of the first cars through that particular year, but when we got close to the top, we did start to see some vehicles, but the rest of it, there was just nobody there, no one.
No, it's a fabulous trip. Viv's done it even more than me. That's funny stories in there too. But
well, pick one of your favorite funny stories. Let's hear that.
Well, as editor of the magazine, I used to run trips for readers, and I'd organise this trip up the Canning Stock route where we'd do some clean-ups and all this sort of stuff. And then Land Rover came along and said, well, we want you to go to, I can't remember now where it was, Morocco or something. And I said to Viv, look, I've got this trip, this freebie trip to England and then to drive the new Range Rover or whatever it was. So how about you taking this trip? So she got the job of leading this trip up the Canning Stock route in a Chevy Suburban, would you believe?
Wow.
So she spent it with her dad, which was really great.
Oh, that's wonderful.
But that old Chevy Suburban graded the track all the way.
I can imagine dragging the belly the whole way.
Yep. Oh, dear.
Yeah, and a lot of vehicles have been nearly written off along that track. I mean, remember when Mercedes tried to do like a demonstration of of durability with the G class, and
Yep.
you have to respect that track. And people, they get in a hurry. It's very long. It's not that technical,
No.
but it's abusive.
Yep.
So
Yep.
if you don't let those shocks cool down and you don't check the bolts every day, you're going to have stuff go wrong, and they or overload the vehicle, for example.
Yep.
Yeah. So it's not that the G wagons were necessarily the problem. It was that the people that were responsible for caring for them weren't doing their job.
And you know what journos are like,
Yeah,
they'll
sure.
go a bit quicker than the normal Joe.
Exactly. Yeah. And that's 2,000 kilometers.
Yeah.
That's a long way.
Oh, yeah, I've seen a lot of vehicles. Shocks are the big thing.
Yeah, they just smoke them.
Yeah, shocks are the big thing. And obviously any of those tracks out there, just the pounding that the chassis takes, and
For sure.
things break and tow bars break and all that sort of stuff.
It certainly does. Yeah. So as a magazine editor and with all this time that you've traveled in Australia, you've used about every single vehicle that was available in your market.
Yeah.
What was your favorite? What was your top 2 or 3?
Well, Land Cruiser's got to be in amongst there somewhere, and we've had a number of Land Cruisers over the years. Just ordered a new one. Hopefully it'll be here by Christmas.
What did you order?
Last October.
And what model did you order?
Troopy, 70
Okay.
series troop carrier.
Nice.
So I've got a 79 at home, which is out with my son in the desert at the moment.
Sure.
But the vehicle that's done the most with us is a Nissan Patrol, GU Patrol.
Yeah.
And
those are famous. For
20 odd
durability.
years old now, and it's been around the world. Done 4 or 5 trips up the Canning. I don't know how many crossings of the Simpson Desert. I don't know how many on Cape York. So it's got a lot of miles up on it.
And does that have the 4.2 liter diesel?
Yeah. 4.2.
Yeah, that's a famous motor.
Yeah.
And the differentials on that were so strong. I mean, they were stronger than the Land Cruiser.
Oh
even.
yeah. The Patrol was never as good in NVH as a Cruiser, and the engines were always a little bit lacking compared to a Cruiser engine. But the drivetrain was bulletproof.
Yeah, literally.
Yeah.
And that's the vehicle that you guys have you did all these trips to Australia. Had you literally just done it all and then you wanted to go see the world? But what's inspired that transition from I'm traveling around Australia to now I want to go see the rest of the world?
Well, we went to Africa.
Okay.
Just after I got out. Well, when I got out of the army, we thought, okay, we got to make a name for ourselves somehow.
Sure.
And at that stage, Qantas was just starting to fly into Africa, into Zimbabwe. They weren't flying into South Africa
Okay.
of apartheid.
Sure.
So we went to them and said, this is what we want to do. And we got a contract, and away we went. And then we started this love affair with Africa.
Yeah, I can see that.
You never go to Africa once.
No, it's incredible.
Yeah, it is. So we started going to Africa, and then I'm thinking, I'd love to go overland. I'd love to go overland. So that's started it. So in 1985, we drove overland. So,
Wow.
and then, it just swelled from there. And then, of course, we got to England, and this is 2007 or whatever it was when we got to England after driving up through Africa. And I said to Viv, why we've not got to ship the vehicle home. Let's drive across Russia, as you do.
Yeah. And what was your route to make it to Vladivostok?
We went up to shipped across, or caught the ferry across to Norway,
Mm-hmm.
then up the coast of Norway to North Cape. Beautiful, beautiful country.
Yeah, incredible.
Yeah, expensive.
It is. Yeah.
Fuel, food, beer, all the important ingredients of life. And then dropped down to St. Petersburg, beautiful city.
So you went through Sweden and Finland, and then
Yeah. Oh yeah, we just skirted along Sweden. That's right. And then St. Petersburg, beautiful city.
it is beautiful.
Yeah, and I say to people, if you're going to go to Russia and go, if you want to go there now, Moscow and St. Petersburg, go to Moscow first and then St. Petersburg.
Sure.
Because if you do it the other way around, you'll be really disappointed with Moscow.
Well, because as I recall, the czars, they hired all these Italian architects to help them build St. Petersburg, and it is really a stunning city. It's beautiful, and there's a lot of art there. Whereas Moscow was, just open land that they developed a massive city of concrete on top of. And it's not to say that there aren't really charming pieces of Moscow, because there are. But it is so different. You know, St. Petersburg feels old, substantial, old history, and you can tell the difference.
And like you said, the art there.
Yeah, it's really good.
Just beautiful.
It is.
So much of it.
Yes.
In the Hermitage.
It is amazing.
And I guess, you look at World War II, and the Germans sacked Europe and got all the treasure, and then the Russians beat the Germans and took all the treasure.
That's what happens. History repeats itself, yeah, for sure.
From there, we dropped down through Russia into Kazakhstan.
Yeah.
And loved Kazakhstan. Just spent wandering through there. Had to go back into Russia because China wouldn't let us cut across.
Yeah.
And then into Mongolia.
And what route did you take across Mongolia?
Well, we started off in the northwest corner.
Sure. And I'm familiar with that border. That is, I think it's one of the longest, at the time, it was one of the longest no man's lands on the planet.
That's right.
I think it's over 20 miles you have to drive between border posts, maybe even a little further than that.
Yep.
And so you're the whole time you're thinking, what happens if I break down? Like, fortunately, it was mostly downhill, I think, and I was in a little chimney, and I'm just like, I got to make it to the border.
And you reminded me of that. I've forgotten about that, how wide it was, the no man's land. And of course, that Mongolian shitbox rally was on at the same time.
And was it?
We were helping all these people out because, they're there.
So fun.
Yeah, in all these clapped out little cars, and tyres are popping and all this sort of thing. And we were repairing tyres for them and getting them on the road again. And then down into Ulaanbaatar, and then down into the Gobi. And then big circuit around the Gobi. Of course, it rained down in the Gobi.
Oh, wow.
We ended up helping some of the tour operators out of there, getting out of the bogs. And then back to Ulaanbaatar, and then up around the Chinese border, up to Lake Baikal.
And that's incredible, too.
Yeah.
Just the size of that lake. I think it has nearly the same amount of fresh water as the Great Lakes in North America.
I find that hard to believe.
Because it's so deep.
Yeah.
It wasn't until, sometime in the last century is when they finally found the depth of it. But it was like maybe in the 60s. It took them a while to find the bottom of this lake.
Yeah, it is unbelievable. We camped beside it for a couple of nights. The weather, it's the weather factory of Siberia, basically.
Interesting.
And man, oh man, the weather changed there so dramatically. And then, of course, we basically followed the border then, Chinese-Russian border.
Sure.
Down to Vladivostok.
Yeah.
And it was an unbelievable trip, but boy, the people couldn't relate. Outside of Vladivostok and St. Petersburg and Moscow, they couldn't relate to travellers really. They were, why are you here?
What are you doing? Why are you doing this?
You must be a Western spy. No, we're not Western spies.
Yeah.
Things like that. But of course, you meet some nice people as well.
No question.
There's no question about that.
What I found was most challenging is the language barrier. In most of Siberia, the small villages, it's very difficult to find an English-speaking person, and the language is so different.
Yep.
It's not a Latin-derived language, so like if you're in Italy, you can kind of make it work or whatever. But in Russia, it's so different.
And the signposts and all.
Yeah, you kind of hope you're going the right way. What did you think of Vladivostok?
Well, we spent a week there, as you normally do when you're trying to organise shipping and all that sort of stuff. We stayed in some fancy hotel overlooking the harbour, and look, you've run into customs and you run into shipping agents and things like that, so you get a different point of view about a city, I guess. We certainly weren't there sightseeing and things like that, but it's a magnificent harbour and all that.
It is very pretty.
Yeah.
It's surprised me.
Yeah.
Because we drove into Magadan and we shipped by container to Vladivostok. So to see the difference between Magadan and Vladivostok is obviously very stark. But I was so impressed with how beautiful Vladivostok was.
Yeah, it was a magnificent harbour and stuff. And they were doing some drills, and these aeroplanes were coming in, just skimming the surface of the harbour, dropping fire retardant and stuff
Sure.
like that on smoking barges, and it was very impressive. In fact, the flying of these guys, picking up water and then dropping it on these smoking barges, and
amazing.
Yeah, so we were watching that from the hotel room. But
how cool!
Yeah, look, back, everything changed with. When the Twin Towers came down, and once upon a time you could go into the harbours and check your vehicle onto the ship damn near. Now you get locked at the gate and somebody takes your vehicle and you go, I hope I see that in Australia again.
Yeah, and then where did you ship from Vladivostok to?
To Australia.
Oh, yeah. So you ship back. And that's a challenge too, shipping anything back into Australia. The cleanliness requirements are very strict.
Man, oh man, a lot of people come undone doing that.
Yeah.
And we've helped a couple of people out. And every time we've gone into Australia with our vehicle, it's taken 2 to 3 weeks to get it out of customs and quarantine.
That's right.
And I know people who've been in shipped vehicles into Australia, and 4 weeks later they're still waiting for the vehicle. And of course, that's not the real problem. The real problem is your visa's ticking away.
Yep.
You haven't got accommodation. You're staying in a hotel, and it adds up. And people are in despair by the time 3 or 4 weeks have gone by.
It's true, and I think it's the one place in the world that I think having a shipping agent is almost a requirement, because some of the shipping agents they have agreements with the Australian government to be able to certify the vehicle as meeting the requirements for cleanliness.
Yep.
So the person that you're hiring is now held responsible for the outcome, and it allows them, because as an individual, you go and you say, all right, I'm going to have this ag inspection of the vehicle. It fails. Now it's got to be quarantined for another however many days, 7 days, I think at least. Whereas this other company can just keep cleaning it until it passes, and then you're off to the races.
The cleaning bill's $700 to
$1,000 every time.
Yep.
It's very expensive.
Yeah.
Yeah. But it works. I mean, and of course our vehicles were filthy from having done the road of bones and everything like that. They were absolutely filthy. Yeah. We had them cleaned 3 times in Russia, and they actually did a pretty good job.
Yeah.
And it's because I had some local folks that I knew well, so I had a relationship with them, and they took the time to do it right. But then it still had to be cleaned in Australia again. Amazing.
Yeah, it is. It's real trap for young players going into there.
But I can't blame Australia for it, though. You guys are an island, and you have these very sensitive ecosystems. And if somebody was to bring in some noxious weed or whatever, it could really damage your beautiful country.
We've got fire ants in Brisbane now, and they're really trying to spend an awful lot of money trying to get them under control.
Yeah,
I met some quarantine people up in Cape York, and we were in a national park, and 3 4-wheelers go by, blokes sitting on them, guns on the back. Wow. What are they doing? They're not just normal people. There's got to be something going on. And they were quarantined, and they were up there shooting pigs and wild horses and doing blood tests and things like that.
Oh,
because
sure.
they told me then, he said, there's more quarantined people in Cape York than the rest of any other port in Australia apart from Sydney.
Oh, wow.
There's more quarantine because we're only 100 kilometres from New Guinea.
True.
And he said, if hoof and mouth or anything like that comes into Australia, it's going to come through Cape York.
Yeah, that makes sense.
And it's going to cost billions in exports and things like that.
Oh, yeah. And the cattle industry is really important in Australia. Yeah. All right, so you ship back into Australia. Now, as I recall, you guys had quite the experience crossing Russia.
Yeah.
And you're starting to figure out, what are we going to do next? You've been traveling in a patrol with a roof tent. What were some things that you learned from that first trip? What were the things that you took away that, hey, this worked great, and then these are some things that I'd like to change?
Yeah, look, rooftop tents are more and more popular every year, in America as they are in Australia, and I think they came out of Africa more than anywhere else.
For sure.
And people don't like sleeping on the ground in Africa.
Understandably, yeah.
So we had a rooftop tent, an Australian made one, and it was really good, and it was great for Africa. But, you start to find the limitations of that when you're in Siberia.
Mm.
So when we got to ship back to Australia, and we thought, well, we'll convince Viv to continue our journeys around the world. we decided we'd take a small camper trailer. And I think one of the other things that is happening, especially in Australia, I don't know whether it's happening in America so much, but certainly in Australia, there's a real thing about GVM and how much weight you're allowed to carry, and insurance problems if you have an accident and all this sort of stuff. So there's this move across to trailers, camper vans.
Yeah, because then you have the gross combined vehicle weight rating between the truck and the trailer. Sure.
Yeah. So there's that move, and that's one of the big things we were talking about Cape York, and one of the big changes once upon a time. When we went to Cape York in the 80s, I had an old trailer that I'd built myself, and got it from, started off as a military trailer, and then I modified it with Land Cruiser wheels and springs and all that sort of stuff. But I was about one of the very few people towing a trailer. Now, you would 95% of the vehicles are towing trailers up on Cape York.
Interesting.
And it's all because of this thing about weight and all that sort of gear. And also people, want a hot water system. And they want a shower.
Yeah. Imagine just going into the bush with just a backpack. I mean, it's like, it works fine too. Yeah. You can actually travel very light. Yeah. But it has definitely been a trend that we have seen as well. So the trucks are getting bigger. Full-size vehicles are now much more common than they ever have been. Yep. And trailers are more common than they ever have been. Big trailers even. Yeah. And so you do gain a whole bunch of comfort, but it's important for people to know, like those that are listening, that there's a huge compromise on the other side.
Yes, there is.
You have a lot more expense. Yep. You're restricted on where you can go. The vehicle gets very, very heavy. Yep. Your fuel costs go up. Yep. So. And
the other thing, my son specialises in taking groups with trailers, and there's been this, since COVID especially, a lot of people coming into the market who've never gone four-wheel driving, never gone camping. And we done a trip last year across the desert, a fairly remote country, Gary Highway, Gun Barrel, Connie Sue, Anbadell, and roads that are iconic in Australia, tracks.
Sure.
And we get these people there, and brand new rigs, brand new cruiser, 200 series cruiser, brand new camper trailer, probably $300,000 combined expense. And talking to them, and how much water are you carrying? 450 litres, 200 gallons. I mean, what? Yeah. That's almost half a ton.
That's right. Yeah, at 8.33 pounds per gallon. That's heavy.
So the vehicles, and that's got a 1,600 kilo axle on it. But you hit a bump with 400 kilos of water on board.
Sure.
And things bend, and there was 3 vehicles ended up with trailers with bent stub axles. And purely because they were carrying too much water.
That's right, too much weight.
Yep. So you've got to get that down.
You really do. And I think that the trip actually improves. The more simple that we keep things, the more the trip improves. Yeah. Because then you're not spending so much energy on all the stuff you brought along.
Yeah. And especially with electronics and
so true.
Oh man. Cars don't have enough USB ports anymore.
I know. It's so true. Yeah, it's so true. Yeah.
Oh dear.
So you guys decide that you're going to try a different tack. So South America is next. So what did you guys decide to use in South America? What was your setup?
Yeah, well, we took our GU patrol, and we towed a small camper trailer, and that allowed us to get friends come in.
Sure.
And they were relegated to the rooftop tent.
Sure.
And we stayed in the camper trailer, but it allowed us that, and so it sort of made the trip a lot more enjoyable, because I really enjoy it, being out there with friends and sharing the experience. And
sure.
That's especially when I'm in Australia, where I know the country so well and all that sort of stuff and the history. And but South Africa was just fabulous, and the people were fantastic. I mean, in fact, we were stopping in one little national park in Argentina, and we hid from people because they were bringing gifts to us and wanting to talk to us.
They're very friendly.
Oh, yeah.
And have you found, I mean, and this is just kind of a fun question to ask, but it seems that Australians are kind of universally loved around the world. There's just something so dang charming about you guys. So have you found that to be true?
Well, look, we haven't had any huge problems at all.
Yeah.
We always get accepted everywhere, and I think here in America we really get accepted once they know you're an Australian. I've had people come up to me and just say thanks for your support.
Yeah.
And that sort of thing. So that's been really, really nice.
Yeah.
We just love being in, we spent 9 months travelling through South America, ended up in North America, and that was back we came into Mexico and then into San Diego and LA at the end of 2011. And we left our vehicle here, went home for a few months, came back and drove up to Alaska and stuff like that in 2012. And we've been coming back ever since. We couldn't leave our vehicle here. You're not allowed to do that. So after 12 months, we shipped our vehicle back home, and we bought a Ram 2500 and put a four-wheel camper on it and come back for 3 months every year. So
perfect.
It's just fabulous.
What do you think of the Ram and the four-wheel camper?
Look, I'm really impressed. I think they're underestimated here as an overland vehicle in Australia. Whether it's my mate who we travelled around the world with, he's got a Ford 250 with a camper on the back. And, he's done everything. Across the Sahara, done an awful lot in Australia. He's done more in Australia than I have, and desert trips and things like that. So I reckon they've been underestimated. And I think we've... with Graham Bell, added a little bit to his article on big rigs.
That's right.
And my thoughts on that. And they can carry the weight easily. And the good thing about having a vehicle like that in the Americas is spare parts and knowledge on how to fix them and stuff like that.
Absolutely. And then you do get to add a little bit more of that comfort. You get that kind of quiet place to sleep at the end of the night.
Yeah.
You don't have dust in your bed, and it does make a big difference.
Yeah.
So after having traveled around the world, and I mean decades now of experience for Viv and you, what do you think are the things that you've learned most? Maybe about yourself first. What kind of things have changed about you after having spent so many years seeing the world?
I've spent most of it with Viv, so I've become to depend on her in lots of ways. It's all a compromise.
It is.
In equipment and how you relate to other people and stuff like that. And people are always surprised that you live in that for 3 months at a time sort of thing. And we've had people, go, God, I'd be divorced if I tried to live with my wife in that for 3 months and things like that. So,
how have you guys made that work then? What have you guys learned together? Because you've seen the world together. What have you learned?
Well, I've mellowed, believe it or not. My wife is killing herself laughing there. But, I guess being ex-military, you sort of grow up, especially when you join the army at 15, 16.
Sure.
You get moulded into the military way.
That's right.
And I had to break that a bit, I guess. I ended up a warrant officer class 1 in the military. So
sure.
And telling people what to do.
Yeah.
Which doesn't work.
When you start telling your family what to do, it doesn't work.
So, that. And I think the other thing with vehicles have become more reliable, but the problem is when they do break down, man, they're so complicated. And I remember we broke down the old Nissan Patrol. It only had one electronic box in it, and that was a security box for the key and key start and all that sort of stuff. And I was really remote country, northwest of Alice Springs, in some Aboriginal land, and drove in to photograph this waterhole, and jumped out, took a few photographs, jumped back in the car, hit the starter, nothing. Starter motor turned over, nothing. And I thought, well, that sounds like fuel. So then you go looking. Ended up on the sat phone to my mate at a server and saying, well, what's the go? He said, there's an electronic box in there that sends some codes to the fuel pump. So then I rang Viv and said, okay, this is where we are. And that's the first time in 40-odd years that I've ever been recovered by somebody else.
That's amazing.
So that electronic box, when I got back to civilization,
Gone.
Rip that box out and just put 12 volts into that fuel
there
pump.
You go. Exactly. Yeah. You want to turn the key and hear things happen.
That's it.
Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah. So, one of the things that we always like to ask, and you've written many books yourself.
Yeah.
But one of the questions that we always like to ask are, what are the books that you've read in your life that you think have been the most impactful for you as a person and for you as a traveler?
Well, in Australia, I think the books by Len Bedell on those roads that he built out in the Western Deserts, which I'm going out to again in a couple of weeks' time and spending a month out there taking people around. I mean, those books just bring that sort of stuff to life. And it was a different time back then, of course. And Aboriginal people now have ownership over much of that land, nearly all of it, in fact. But still the tracks are there and the history's there and all that sort of stuff. So they are really good books. And then, look, I read an awful lot. I read a lot of Australian history and when I come to America, American history, Kit Carson and all that sort of stuff.
Fascinating.
We grew up with that in Australia as young kids, cowboys and Indians and things like that. But, Lewis and Clark, we really enjoy the Lewis and Clark stories, and so that prompts us to travel in America. And it's a similar thing as in Australia, Burke and Wills. And see, going back to my great-great-grandfather, he went with Sturt in the 1844, Amazing. 1845 expedition to Central Australia. So I sort of relate to that. And my grandfather, he rode Pony Express on the Central Australian telegraph line before the ends were connected. So, I've got a bit of history going back into that. And that sort of provides me with the impetus to go and see that and travel in those footsteps, I guess. So I like following in the footsteps of explorers. There's this tangible sense of history. And you would know too from going the Canning Stock route. You can touch history on that.
You can. Yeah. Those wells and everything else is fascinating.
Sort of stuff, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely incredible.
Yeah.
Truly beautiful.
Yeah.
And then one of the other things that we like to ask, if you were to sit down to have lunch with someone that was getting ready to go off and go into the world like you and Viv have and go cross Russia or to go up Africa or whatever, what would be the top pieces of advice you would give them? What would be the things that you would want to make sure that they understood?
Well, I think one of the things, and I'm sure you would have seen the same too, is you don't have to get carried away with the equipment. Just step back a bit. And people say, "Oh, what vehicle should I have?" And I say, "Well, what vehicle you got?"
Yeah.
And I'll go a Jeep or a Land Rover or something. Why not? Just jump in that and go. I remember we met two young a couple in Argentina. A little Toyota Corolla, roof rack on top, loaded to the gunnel, and they were setting off for Alaska. 20-year-old vehicle. If it broke down, it didn't really matter.
Right.
If they couldn't repair it. And I think you've got to have that love of that. And it's not money or that, it's motivation to get you started and to get you out there. And then I say to people, don't keep saying, I'm going to do that one day.
Yeah.
Set a date. If it's a weekend trip, set it for 2 weeks' time or 3 weeks' time. If it's a month-long trip, set it for 6 months' time. Mm-hmm. If it's a trip around the world, go, I'm going to ship the vehicle on the 15th of June, 2023.
Yeah.
And then work towards that. Get the cat sorted out, get the garden sorted out, whatever it takes.
Sure.
But don't keep saying, I'm going to do that one day, because you won't do it. Set a date.
Yeah, it's amazing how we'll continue to give up on our dreams.
Yeah.
To satisfy whatever is interesting today, maybe on social media or whatever.
Yeah.
Which if you think about the amount of time people spend on, let's call it Facebook.
Yeah.
If you could get back all of that time, you'd have the vehicle built. You'd have your route planned.
Yeah.
You've probably made some more money because you've had more time at work.
That's true.
And next thing you know, you're off to go actually see the world instead of seeing other people do it.
Yeah. Yeah, very true. Yeah, that's, get out there and do it. Pick up a map and then, And I mean, Facebook and all that sort of stuff is great for keeping in touch with people, but don't get too carried away with it. I mean, I'd hate to be starting off as a prospective journalist, or I don't call myself a journalist, just a writer, and today.
Yeah.
With the forces of, you've got to have a multimedia presence and on Twitter and Facebook,
sure,
and Instagram and all that sort of stuff. And we've got, we do a bit on Facebook and we do a bit on Instagram, but to make a living out of it,
it's a tall order, isn't it?
Yeah, my word, lots of people out there trying it.
Yeah,
and a lot sell their soul to the lowest bidder.
Yeah, they do,
to get a set of tires or
just
whatever.
Just buy the tires. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, Ron, thank you so much
for
being here in Prescott, for taking some time out of your busy schedule. Thanks to your wife, Viv, as well, for allowing this to all happen and for putting up with you going around the world. I got a nod from her just now, a big nod. You've really inspired generations, and you should be very proud of the things that you guys have done, the quality of work that you've done. We're so grateful that your content has been in Overland Journal and on Expedition Portal, and we've been able to share that with our audience as well. How do people find out more about you and Viv and what you're doing? How do they find you in the social world?
Our major website is guidebooks, guidebooks.com.au, AU for Australia. And then we have dirtroaddiaries.com.au. And then there's Facebook and Ron Moon. And then there's Remote Australia, Ron and Viv Moon's Remote Australia Facebook page.
Okay.
And that's really Australian stuff.
Okay.
And how
about on Instagram? How do they find you on Instagram?
I don't even know my Instagram address.
I want to be like Ron when I grow up.
Can't remember.
That's okay.
But
they could probably search Ron Moon on there.
It's on there. I mean, if you search Ron and Viv Moon Australia, you'll
find
a few hits and stuff like that.
Okay, that's great.
Like I said, going back in the conversation, I like motivating people to go out and have a look at the country, and there's no better way of doing that than on a motorbike or in a four-wheel drive, going out and camping
inflatable
under a tree
kayak
or whatever.
For sure.
That's the best way of seeing it.
No, and you've done that. You've motivated so many people to see Australia and to see the world, Ron. So thank you so much for spending the time with me today. We're grateful to have you on the podcast, and I look forward to hearing what you're up to next. In fact, that is the question. Where are you guys going next?
Well, we're back to Australia next Monday, and then I'll be heading out in the desert country, running a trip for my son across some of the bomb roads of that Len Bedell built, and coast to coast we call it. We go from the southern coast to the northwest coast of Australia, and that's 3 weeks of remote country.
Fantastic.
It's fabulous, absolutely fabulous. About 800, 900 miles between Aboriginal communities.
Sure.
So you know what it's like.
Fantastic.
It's fantastic. So that'll be the first trip, and then I'll come back. Viv will be spending some time with the parents while I'm out, and then we'll head bush and go up to northwestern New South Wales. There's had a lot of rain through there. 10-year drought's broken.
Wow.
All the lakes are full. Birds have moved in.
Fantastic.
It should be fan-damn-tastic.
We're... Oh, that's great. Yeah, well, Ron, thank you so much again for being on the podcast.
Yep. Well, thanks for having us.
You bet. And we thank you all for listening, and we'll talk to you next time.